That day, even though she was supposed to be in the meeting at this time, I found her crying quietly in a corner of the emergency stairwell. They said I'm an incompetent high school dropout and that I don't belong here. Molly, who was supposed to be one of the developers, had been kicked out of the meeting after just 5 minutes. As soon as I heard that, I stormed into the meeting room. "You're all fired." The people in the room were frozen in shock at my declaration. Then, as they realized what I'd said, the room erupted in chaos. My name is Alex. I'm a 36-year-old businessman. My grandfather is the chairman of a large corporate group, though I've rarely benefited from it. The reason is that my parents, despite my grandfather's objections, got married and basically ran away to do so. My father, who had been a high-ranking employee at a trading company, quit his job and started running a small shop in a rural town. Although we weren't exactly wealthy, our shop was a valued part of this nearly abandoned town, where most of the residents were elderly. We even offered delivery service. My father believed in selling good quality products at lower prices to make the people in the town happy. Because of his philosophy, despite how busy he was, I remember our sales were modest. Still, our life, grounded in the town and the support of the community, was far from unpleasant. With so few children around, people who I could hang out with were naturally limited. In a town where all the elementary school kids didn't even add up to 10, we had to take a bus to a school in the city. At the city school, everyone was always talking about gaming consoles, but very few of us owned one. Occasionally, we'd play at the house of a friend who had one, but I didn't feel like I fully fit in with that crowd. But there were plenty of rowdy kids who liked running around outside, and I was one of them. The city schoolyard was smaller than the empty lots back home, but there was enough space for kids to play tag or dodgeball. So I'd come home covered in dirt and get scolded for messing up my clothes. Since I had to catch the bus, I couldn't stay out late with my friends in the city, but once back in town, I'd spend time with a few other kids, playing soccer or whatever we wanted in the open fields. With so few children in town and most adults commuting to work in the city and not coming home until late. In a town where most adults either ran local shops like my father or were retired elderly residents, it was only natural for older kids to look after the younger ones. When I was in middle school, I had local high school and middle school kids looking out for me. So, by the time I became a middle schooler, I started watching over the younger kids myself. That wasn't too hard, though, since there were even fewer kids in my generation. Molly, who lived close by, was the only younger child around me. Her parents worked and lived in the city, leaving her in the care of her grandmother in town, so I hardly ever saw them. Molly was a shy, quiet child. A child who can't express their wants. Is that the right way to put it? She was the type who tried hard to be a good girl so as not to be a burden to her grandmother and to please her parents whenever they came back. It was heartbreaking to watch someone so young endure so much, even from my perspective as a middle schooler. I told my parents about it, but there wasn't much I could do as a kid. So, when I went over to Molly's house, my parents would tell me gently, "Take a few things from the store to bring as a gift." I'd hand Molly a small bag every time I saw her. I didn't know what was inside. But Molly's grandmother would smile when she saw the contents, and she'd treat me to dinner. Looking back now, those bags probably held food or daily necessities. Over time, Molly and her family started visiting our shop frequently, and we eventually became close family friends. Molly began calling me Big Bro, and as an only child, I was thrilled to have what felt like a real sister. We grew up almost like siblings. Several years later, my father suddenly passed away from an illness, and it was at his funeral that I learned, for the first time, that he was the heir to a major corporation. My grandfather regretted opposing my parents' marriage and had been searching for them. However, when he finally found my father, he saw how happy he was, fully integrated into this town, running his own small shop, and decided not to bring him back. He quietly kept an eye on us from afar, but when he heard of my father's passing, he came immediately. Then, he proposed to take my mother and me in as part of the family. At first, My mother hesitated, but without my father, it would have been challenging to keep the store running. And there was also the issue of my education. Although I was prepared to give up my studies and start working, neither my mother nor my grandfather supported that idea. Eventually, my mother agreed, and we moved in with my grandfather. Molly cried when we left, but we promised each other to write letters and kept each other updated on our lives through our correspondence. Being taken in by my grandfather brought a sudden change to my life, and though I felt disoriented at first, I was grateful for the financial support that allowed me to focus on my studies and get accepted. He didn't just cover my entrance exam fees, he also paid for my entire schooling up to graduation. The condition, however, was that I would work in one of his group companies after graduation. I knew it was a privilege, but I still vented my frustration in doubts and letters. Back then, the only person I could confide in was Molly. I'll never forget how she replied, "You're doing great, big bro." A few years later, her parents divorced. Her mother retained custody, but she never came to get Molly, not even attending the funeral of her grandmother who had raised her. As she approached middle school graduation, she confided in me that continuing her education would be difficult, so I took bold action. I humbled myself before my grandfather and the company, asking if she could be given a job, even starting from factory work. Despite her limited education. Since the company is well known for its domestic car brand, its factories offered dormitories with cafeterias, so she wouldn't lack food or shelter. When I explained that the work would be tough, she looked at me with determined eyes and said, "Even so, I want to try and make it on my own." I knew then that she would be fine. Time flew by, and over 10 years have passed since then. Before I knew it, I'd become the vice president, seen by the company as my grandfather's successor. In the beginning, many employees were wary of me as the high-profile hire. I was frowned upon by the bosses, but some of the executives knew my father and would reminisce, saying things like, "Your father was remarkable back when he worked at a trading company in the group." These mentors, while fond of me, were tough, patiently teaching and guiding me through work with a steady hand. That foundation is what led me to my current role as vice president. Rumors about nepotism still persist, but I've produced results and never embarrassed those who trained me. I feel proud, standing strong and confident, knowing that I climbed up through my own merit. Of course, I don't forget that I owe much to my grandfather's influence. But I understood that my promotion was because I'd earned enough trust to be given the position of vice president. And over these past 10 years, it hasn't only been me putting in the effort. Molly, too, kept studying online while working in the factory, developing IT skills and eventually earning a position at the main office. To be precise, she moved from being a part-time worker to a full-time employee. When it was decided that Molly would join the technical team, my mother, Molly, and I celebrated at a nice restaurant. My mother, who worried so much about Molly, had even suggested that she live with us, given how her biological mother had abandoned her. But Molly insisted on standing on her own, so my mother did her best to support her by at least sending her groceries. For my mother, who felt a profound loss after my father's passing and then losing me to my grandfather, Molly became like a real daughter. For me, who grew up with Molly almost as family, I was thrilled by her promotion. Now, working with her at headquarters, I truly admired her for the knowledge and skills she'd worked so hard to acquire. And I couldn't help but feel proud, wanting to boast to everyone, "Look at my amazing little sister." In truth, Molly is exceptionally capable at work. When she first joined the technical team, the atmosphere grew tense, given the male-dominated environment. But fortunately, some employees recognized her from her time as a factory worker. What started with awkward conversations gradually turned into a smooth working relationship as people saw her competence and technical knowledge. Some who initially dismissed her for being a woman were eventually won over by her dedication. Handling criticism with thoughtfulness and never showing tears, pushing through her work with diligence. Although Molly was fully accepted in the technical team, her reputation in other departments wasn't as positive. In fact, as her ability to foster smoother collaboration with the technical team won her admiration from many of the men. She became the target of jealousy from some of the female employees. I would sometimes overhear groups of female employees gossiping about her in the break room. Isn't she embarrassed, flirting with all the guys? Technical team? Isn't that just a group of nerds? She's just getting a big head from their attention. Their petty remarks didn't even acknowledge Molly's hard work or talent. All I could think was how grateful I was that Molly wasn't placed in an admin position dominated by female employees. In terms of putting people where they're best suited, Molly's skills truly shine in the technical department. I'm grateful to the HR team for making the right call, not sticking her in a random admin role just because she's a woman. As I passed by the break room, I heard the click of heels and was stopped by a beautiful woman approaching from the front. It was Rose, a top employee from the sales department. She comes from a good family, has an impressive educational background, and is the daughter of one of the company's executives. She's a bit of a celebrity within the company, admired by many men and even more so by the women. "Alex, where are you off to?" "Oh, just heading back to work after lunch," I lied nonchalantly. In truth, I was meeting up with Molly for a rare lunch together. "I see. I was hoping we could eat lunch together, but that's too bad." Rose, with a slightly lonely expression, is indeed beautiful. But I know that she changes her behavior depending on whom she's talking to. In fact, her father, Michael, the sales manager, has disliked me since I joined the company, and while Rose is talented, she has been somewhat pampered in the department he oversees. Even if she makes mistakes, she rarely gets reprimanded, and others are left to clean up after her. Yet, she does well in sales, manages major clients, and can hold her own in English with international clients. So I understand why she's so popular among female employees. Still, I wasn't fond of her type. Maybe you'd call her a go-getter. Although her father dislikes me, Rose seems to feel differently and has been openly seeking my attention, especially since I became vice president. She doesn't even hide her desire to be with me as a candidate for the next president. I can't stand it. People say any man would be thrilled to be pursued by a beautiful woman, but I know she only wants my title, not me. I'm dating the vice president, who's the next in line for the president. It was obvious that she only wanted the status that came with it, and to her, I was nothing more than a mere accessory. So, I tried to avoid her as much as possible, though it seemed she'd anticipated me today. I'm sorry about that. My breaks are irregular, so it's hard to coordinate. But make sure you're taking proper breaks. Yes, thank you for your concern. As long as we were just exchanging polite words, she was the perfect elite beauty. All right then, I'll take my leave. She walked past me into the break room. I could imagine her joining the circle of female employees gossiping in there. I continued to the rooftop, where we'd agreed to meet. There's a small terrace there, not popular due to the narrow space and strong sunlight, and it's become a bit of a forgotten spot. When I arrived, Molly was already there. "Big bro, you're late." Sorry. She'd been pouting, but the moment I apologized, she broke into a smile. Together, we enjoyed a relaxing, fun lunch with homemade bento box from my mom. One day, we went out to dinner with my mom and Molly at a restaurant over the weekend. Molly seemed in high spirits, like she had something she wanted to say. As my mother and I waited, curious about her news, we took our seats in a private room. The moment we sat down, Molly beamed and said, "Guess what? There's going to be a meeting about an engine design I worked on. The technical department holds meetings to review developed components, and if they're approved, they become part of the final product." For Molly, it was her first time having a part she developed brought up in such a meeting. It was an honor for a new employee. My mother and I watched her excitement with warm smiles. Seeing her now a self-assured, independent young woman was so different from the shy, timid girl she'd once been. Thinking about how she'd leveraged her experience handling parts in the factory after middle school, taking various certifications to get this far. It was deeply moving. Well then, let's make tonight a celebration for that. Yes. And Molly, you're not paying for anything tonight. Oh, no, that's not why I told you. That troubled look on her face was the same as always. She's never been accustomed to receiving kindness, nor does she know how to rely on others. So, my mother and I decided long ago to indulge her as much as we could. Don't you want us to celebrate with you? That's not fair, big bro. Puffing her cheeks in that familiar pout, a habit she's had since she was a child. My mother sided with me, saying gently, I'd like to celebrate with you too, and with that, Molly nodded, blushing and smiling with a bit of resignation. Our dinner that evening revolved around Molly eagerly talking about her latest work. Even though my mother didn't understand much of the technical details, she kept nodding and smiling, saying, I'm just happy to see you so excited, Molly. As for me, I could follow along and was genuinely impressed. It was a revolutionary system, I thought. It had a level of completeness that made me feel confident it would pass the meeting. When I said, we'll have to celebrate again once it's launched, Molly scolded me for jumping the gun, but her face lit up with a bright smile, shining with anticipation of success. And yet, here she was, crying. Tears streamed down her face, filled with frustration and despair. At a time when she should have been attending that important meeting, I found her quietly sobbing in a corner of the emergency stairwell. I knew she came here when things were tough, but I never expected to run into her here by chance today, of all days. Startled, I quickly led her to a nearby private room and, after calming her down, asked what had happened. Her answer left me speechless. She had handed out her designs and supporting documents to the participants, and the meeting had barely started when, after about 5 minutes, someone had said, incompetent high school dropouts don't belong here. And with that, she'd been dismissed. As soon as I heard this, I left Molly there and rushed to the meeting room. Without hesitation, I burst in and announced, "You're all fired." The people in the room froze, stunned by my declaration. Then, as they began to process my words, the room erupted in chaos. "Alex, what are you talking about, barging in like this? We're in the middle of a meeting. Get out." The first to recover was Michael, the sales manager. Others soon chimed in, saying things like, "Yeah, this isn't your place," and, "Alex, this has nothing to do with you. I don't know what's going on, but this is clearly inappropriate." Even Rose, who usually fawns over me, sneered. None of them seemed remotely concerned that a new designer had been thrown out of the meeting. The realization fueled my anger further. I was about to unleash some choice words when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned, still furious, and standing there was Matthew, the head of the technical department. "Alex, calm down. What are you doing here?" I was asked to explain the parts on behalf of our new employee. Matthew's calm tone only added to my irritation. Our new employee had been kicked out for no reason. If anyone should be angrier than me, it was him, yet he stood there, composed. "Matthew, are you aware of why the new employee was dismissed?" "No." "That's why I intend to ask about it before the meeting begins." His words were firm, his gaze cold. And then I understood. He was angry, too. Good. Molly wasn't alone. She had a place in her department, and at least the technical team was on her side. That realization lifted a weight from my shoulders, helping me regain some composure. The meeting is already running late. As head of the technical department, you should prioritize the product explanation over discussing the new employee. Michael's irritated voice was met with a cold response from Matthew. "I'd like to hear a legitimate reason why the most knowledgeable engineer behind this design was thrown out, and I, who have only a general overview, was summoned in her place." The room fell silent for a moment. "Well, that's, Michael stammered, his voice barely audible. As the others averted their gazes, trying to avoid involvement, Rose's clear voice cut through. Despite her being the designer, I felt that this meeting was too much for a mere high school dropout newbie, so I requested her to leave. A dignified voice rang out, resonant as if it had delivered justice. Those words, devoid of any hint of guilt, struck a nerve in me. And who made that decision? Everyone here, of course. Isn't that right? At her words, the employees avoided eye contact and remained silent, which made Rose frown. Alex and Matthew are asking for clarification. Could you all just tell the truth? Convinced of her position, she glanced around, and reluctantly, a few employees nodded. Looking satisfied, Rose smiled, but one employee spoke up clearly. It was Rose who first said high school dropouts don't belong here, and then Michael told her to get out, calling her an incompetent dropout. When a younger employee spoke up, another employee followed, confirming the truth of their statement. This sparked a wave of sympathetic voices that began to fill the room. That was harsh. She left crying. I hope she's okay. Although spoken in hushed tones, it was clear that many, especially younger employees, saw Molly's treatment as unfair. Seeing this, Michael and Rose's faces darkened. Enough of this chatter. I spoke to Rose, who had slammed her hand on the desk. No, the one who needs to be quiet here is you. The quiet anger in my voice startled Rose. But she quickly recovered, glaring at me. And just what business do you have here, Alex? This meeting doesn't concern you. Following Rose's words, Michael chimes in. Exactly. Why are you here, Alex? And as for firing us, you don't have that authority. As he said this, other employees, emboldened by his words, chimed in with that's right, and started turning on me. You're correct. I don't have the authority to fire you all. And you, equally, had no authority to throw out the designer. Exactly. She was here as a representative of the technical department. She's the most knowledgeable about this technology. And yet, could the reason really be? He let out a deep sigh, rubbing his temples as if to ease a headache. What's this? Why are you blaming us like that? She's a new hire and even a high school dropout. What could we possibly learn from someone like that? That's right. Besides, I hear it was Alex who pulled some strings to get her a job here. Favoritism isn't a good look, you know. Without a hint of remorse, Michael and Rose said this as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Yes, I won't deny that I arranged for her to work at the factory part-time right after she graduated middle school. Rose and the others smirked, as if satisfied with this confession. Encouraged by them, others jumped in, spewing baseless gossip, nepotism from the vice president, probably only here because she's pretty. She must have used her looks to get where she is. Tired of the slander, I raised my voice. But since then, she's earned the equivalent of a college degree through online learning. She went through the same rigorous exam and interview process as any new employee to become a full-time staff member. The murmuring employees fell silent. Did they truly not know? It's difficult to get hired by this company, after all. That's probably why there were so many rumors about how a high school dropout could have joined. Yet, it was Rose and her circle who had steered that speculation into a narrative filled with malice. Just as Alex said, her technical skills are outstanding. Plus, she holds several difficult-to-obtain certifications. He looked around the room and then added. In fact, in the technical department, no one else could explain this component with the same accuracy and precision as she can. Matthew's clear words silenced everyone in the room. Only Rose and Michael bit their lips in frustration, glaring at him as if he were something detestable. Let's get back on track. Michael, let me ask you again. Do you have any legitimate reason, other than her level of education, for excluding a skilled employee from the meeting? Michael merely grunted, unable to respond. Then Rose cut in. With all due respect, Alex, we didn't know about her capabilities. All we knew was that she had only a high school dropout. She looked up at me with a coy, almost flirtatious expression. So, naturally, it's reasonable to assume she was underqualified, isn't it? Seeing her complete lack of remorse, I said. It seems you still don't understand. Dismissing an employee who was the lead designer simply due to her educational background constitutes harassment. Are you aware of that? My voice was cold, and for the first time, Rose's expression shifted. Suddenly, excuses started pouring out. It was a rational decision. I didn't mean it that way, and I thought it might be too much responsibility for someone so young. Rose kept piling on more explanations, seemingly unaware that with every word, she was digging deeper her own grave. Fed up, I turned my gaze back to Michael. Regarding this incident, the president, Mr. Underwood, will be following up on this as a serious matter. So please prepare a full account of the events. With that, I left the room. Matthew joined me, showing his disinterest in staying, and we both walked out. From the other side of the closed door, we could hear angry voices, but we shrugged and returned to handle the necessary follow-up. The incident was soon reported as a major case throughout the company, with clear instructions issued to prevent similar issues in the future. Mr. Underwood reported it to the chairman, Mr. Olson, who made a public announcement across the group, expressing the gravity of mistreatment based on academic background. Anonymous surveys and new consultation lines were set up to ensure any other cases could be reported. Michael, Rose, and those who made disparaging remarks about dropouts and told her to get out received various penalties, including salary reductions and suspensions, thus closing the incident. Since then, a hotline has received a steady stream of consultations. It's probably something that's bound to happen, not just with Molly and me, but within a company as large as this corporate group. But leaving these unchecked wasn't an option. As vice president, I reminded myself of that. There will always be those who judge people solely by their academic background or titles, believing it to be only natural. Their pride in being highly educated and viewing themselves as winners only further justifies the system of academic elitism in their minds. But just because someone attended a good school doesn't mean they'll excel at their job. Of course, educational background can certainly serve as one criterion for identifying talented individuals. However, many people are unable to pursue higher education due to various circumstances. Simply dismissing potential employees who may have exceptional skills or talent based solely on their academic background, without evaluating them through interviews or assessments, may not be beneficial for the company in the long run. Hey, big bro, what's got you so lost in thought? Oh, nothing. Just thinking I still have a lot to learn. Hearing this, Molly looked at me curiously before breaking into laughter. When I asked what was so funny, she seemed surprised I hadn't heard the rumors. You know, even though I was at the center of all this, you made sure my name wasn't mentioned, right? Of course, it's confidential. It's a large corporate group. Stories from just one of its departments wouldn't reach most people outside that circle, nor would anyone know exactly who was involved. But it was different for me, as I held the title of vice president. Being the grandson of Mr. Olson, my name was widely recognized within the group. It seems that not only the incident but the way it was handled became a widely circulated story across the group companies, complete with embellishments. Big bro is all the buzz around here. They say you're a revolutionary for this company. Thanks to the new support line set up across the company, many more people than expected felt they'd been helped. It seems I'd unknowingly become someone employees respected and appreciated. What's that about? If anything, it's strange that there weren't measures in place before. A big company stuck in its old ways. The fact that you think that way and act on it, that's what makes you an outstanding vice president. Watching Molly laugh as she praised me, I felt, even if only a little, that I was becoming someone who deserved this role. 10 years have passed since then. Despite factional struggles with traditionalists like Michael, I've risen to the position of president. Molly has become the first female department head in the technical division, where she continues to work hard, developing new technologies and bringing numerous patents to the company. No one calls her a high school dropout or incompetent anymore. In fact, most employees are shocked when they hear her background directly from her. However, she never hides her background and often brings it up proactively during training sessions. She then challenges the employees with this thought: having an education and knowledge is certainly an advantage. But those are merely advantages at the starting line. One's true value can only be demonstrated through their future work. Having risen to the role of department head, Molly has now become a true icon within the company. As for Rose, she resigned quickly after Michael lost his influence in the company and went on to marry the president of an IT firm. Whether or not love played a part in that decision, I couldn't say, but it seemed very much like her. Michael himself remains a department head, still working at the company. Gone is his old ambition, replaced by a softer, supportive demeanor. Over time, he's become a mentor who praises and encourages his team, almost like a doting grandfather. It surprised me at first, but when he happily shared, "I have a new grandchild," I realized that family had changed him. My grandfather is still energetic, actively overseeing his role as chairman, though he occasionally drops hints that have nothing to do with work. "When are you going to give me a great-grandchild?" he'll grumble, half joking, half impatient. But that's a blessing we'll just have to wait for. "What's on your mind, darling?" Molly, my wife of 1 year, asked, breaking my reverie. My mother was overjoyed that Molly had truly become like a daughter to her. And the typical mother-in-law and daughter-in-law issues didn't exist in our family. If anything, I sometimes find myself excluded from their conversations as they bond over shared interests. But our life together, the three of us, is filled with happiness. I murmured quietly to myself, "I'm so lucky." And Molly leaned close, whispering in my ear like she was telling a secret. "Yes. The three of us, and by spring, we'll be four." With that news, I wrapped her in a tight embrace,